This is Spirit in Motion.
Hey, what's up? Welcome to our podcast, Spirit in Motion. And today we are talking about having doubts in your faith.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a huge question for you.
Okay.
You are a pastor.
Right.
Whit is your name. In
Yes.
case people don't know it.
Thank you.
Of a large church that's been around for a long time. You're our pastor. Do you have doubts about your faith?
Yes. Yeah, totally.
We just lost our church. It's over.
No, I mean, I would think, I feel like everybody does. Maybe they don't, but it seems natural to me. There are times I find myself wondering, is all this real? Have we made all this up? I mean, if you've never been praying and thought to yourself, is anyone listening or am I just talking to the air?
Yeah.
I don't know if you're human.
or if you're like teaching your little kid about something from the Bible or reading a story from the Bible and you're like, this is kind of a weird story that I've never really thought about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought, I have one kid.
Mm-hmm.
She's almost 3.
Mm-hmm.
You tell me I'm dabbling in parenthood.
Right.
Which I kind of believe because there's always, I also live by 4 other families who we regularly say, can someone watch the Nest Cam? We got to go to Target. And they live so close. We could have just like a giant house. It would be no different. But I found myself, I would read her, especially early on, I would read her stories from the Jesus Storybook Bible, which is a really beautifully illustrated Bible for kids to read a story to. But I'm like, oh man, I am teaching another human these stories that some of them are a little odd.
Or do I just believe all of this because my parents taught it to me?
Oh, hello.
Has it all just been passed down? I'm just part of a continuing myth.
Because we've both been
Sure.
in church and Christianity our whole lives.
Yeah. I've totally had all those feelings. I still have them, regularly. I mean, I won't say they're like existential crisis moments where I just kind of, fall to the floor and like a plate of spaghetti or something, just whatever. Yeah. I'm done and in tears and then come back. It's not that, but there are fleeting thoughts that go through your mind that's just like, wow, is this real, for a moment? And then you kind of remind yourself, no, I do believe this. And here's why and whatever. And you kind of come back, or you hear a convincing argument against God. Mm-hmm. You'll hear something from an atheist or someone is taking apart the arguments of a Christian thinker that you respect, and you're just like, oh man, like that. It kind of tugs at your soul, or maybe puts cracks in the foundation a little bit. Sometimes like the deconversion stories have done that to me too.
Which is a story of somebody who was following Jesus and then didn't.
Yeah, just was like, you know what, I don't believe this anymore, and here's why. And I've kind of walked away from all this, and you're like, oh man. And there's a deep part of me that really wants to know the truth about things. And really hates the idea of being duped. And I think a lot of us feel that way, but I know I especially want to know what's the right thing, what's the best thing, And so when I hear that stuff, I'm like, oh, maybe they know something I don't know. What have they learned? What if there's some information that I haven't figured out? I mean, those thoughts go through my mind.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Maybe especially if it's someone you respect.
Yeah.
Growing up, belief is I think there's I took a test one time, it's belief is a strong part.
It's really high for you.
It's really high for me.
Yeah. Interesting.
Like you, if you said something to me, I'd be like, okay, I believe it. And when most likely I don't know, Whit told me, so I'll go with that. Well, your father was my pastor for, so many years. Right. And I remember one day after Di and I got married, we came home and after church, and she was like, that thing we heard this morning at church, I don't know how I feel about that.
Wow, that had to mess with you.
And I was like, you mean from Pastor George? And she's like, yeah. I was like, okay, I think maybe we're getting a divorce. because I don't know how to experience. I don't. I just
wow. It like unravels your whole world.
Yeah,
I felt similarly before. Yeah, like when, like I said, when you're a deconversion story or some some thinker taking apart a Christian argument that you've heard or whatever, or someone who was Orthodox Christian and then starts kind of opening up their sort of theological framework and like a Carlton Pearson or a Rob Bell moving more into those, and you're going, whoa, what's happening here? Do you, you want to project this confidence? Oh, I still believe it. I'm still good, but secretly I think there's some thoughts of like, what if they're right? Mm-hmm. What if they figured something out? Mm-hmm. Totally been through that,
and it's scary. I mean,
just from freaky.
Me. Because if my foundation is 20-some years built here and you're starting to chip away at it, I don't like the way that feels.
Yeah, no, I don't know that anyone does, which I think is why it's so hard for people to change like belief systems and to deconvert or convert in the first place. It's like, I mean, you're asking a lot of someone.
Yeah. I mean, personally, and this isn't a slight on anyone, but growing up, I did feel this sense of doubt wasn't specifically welcomed, or questions. Let's not question the Bible.
Yeah.
Or the pastor.
Right.
Yeah. Let's just be like, okay, we're good with that.
Yeah. I think that when it comes to a lot of Christians, we only have one category for doubt, and that it's bad. Yeah. It's just wrong. You shouldn't do it. You don't need to have it. It's a bad idea. There's a guy who's now part of our church. He actually, he grew up to some degree in church, but had a lot of questions as a kid, a young person, started asking questions that made the church, the pastor, the staff, whoever it was, very uncomfortable, to the point that they just said, stop asking those questions.
Oh, wow.
Which led him to leave the faith or leave Christianity, leave the church. And then he pursued like all these other religions, including Satanism, actually, for a season. Yeah. And then he ended up circling back around to Christianity. And I think I think about him often because I think about, wanting to be the kind of church that welcomes those types of questions, that isn't afraid. I don't see Jesus shutting people down for asking tough questions. I mean, that is, what we're talking about today when we talk about doubt and we're talking about Thomas. Yeah. Is you're talking about someone who's asking a really difficult question. Yeah. Who's wanting to know why something happened, how it happened, how to make sense of things. And Jesus doesn't shut that down. He actually welcomes it. He leans into it. He presses into it. And I think a lot of people outside the church, their experience with the church, and it's unfortunate, but their experience with Christians in the church is don't ask that. And I think the reason, and this is just me kind of spitballing off the top of my head, but I would imagine the reason is, if it's uncomfortable for us when we're here sitting talking about our own, doubts, if it's really uncomfortable for us to acknowledge those and feel them, I can only imagine when someone's asking difficult questions that it's uncomfortable for the person who's being asked if they don't know the answers. Oh, yeah. And so, I can imagine a natural response in a lot of those situations would be, let's not talk about that. It's kind of like not wanting to look at your credit card balance when it's really high. I don't want to know. Let's just act like that's not there. And I think that kind of, let's just hide that or avoid it, is the way a lot of people choose to live. Is just let's ignore ugly feelings, uncomfortable stuff. Let's just not talk about it because it's too much for me to deal with right now.
Yeah, when you're talking about doubting, if you have spent any amount of time in church, there's a very good chance I say the word doubt and you think of Doubting Thomas. Yeah, is like a name that right that the Bible gave him.
No, just Christians have labeled him Doubting Thomas.
I like I didn't know the answer, but
sure. Yeah. No, it's not something that the Bible calls him at all.
Yeah, but it's a big story in the Bible that has more significant meaning than maybe we realize on the surface. I think, at least for me, I would hear the story. So Jesus after the resurrection comes to Thomas and Thomas doubts that it happened. And it's like, don't be like Thomas.
Yeah.
Don't doubt it.
He's sort of like a cautionary tale. Don't do that. Don't be that guy.
Right.
Right. But I think there's so much more to be learned from that story.
Plot twist. What Thomas is doing actually might be something really similar to what we all experience.
It might be, yeah, that's true. And I think in some way, I think you could even say it might be a little bit commendable what's happening there.
Let's just, first, who was Thomas?
Okay, so Thomas was a disciple of Jesus.
So
there were 12.
There were 12 of them.
Right.
And then not Judas.
Yeah. Yeah, so Judas was one of those 12 too. So Jesus picks, and it was part of, kind of part of their culture. Rabbis had disciples, which are basically adherents, people who would follow the rabbi around. Were meant to become like the rabbi and extend the rabbi's teachings. So a rabbi would have a particular kind of point of view, maybe teaching emphasis, and the disciples would be sort of students of that rabbi's school of thought.
I've never asked this before. Would that not be unlike if you were like in college, like when after you would get your bachelor's degree, you might go back and study under a specific professor?
Yeah, I mean it could be. Yeah. But so much more than just kind of knowing what they know. You're actually wanting to become like this person.
Oh, wow.
This person is meant to become a model for how you're going to live. You're adopting their whole way of life.
Which is why we say we're trying to be like Jesus.
Well, yeah. I mean, that has massive implications, as you could imagine, for the way that we talk about our faith. So Thomas was one of 12. So was Judas. So the account of Thomas that we're referring to comes from John chapter 20, which is post-resurrection. Jesus has been resurrected. He's appeared to the disciples minus Thomas and Judas. Judas has hanged himself. He's dead.
He's gone.
Yeah. Thomas we don't know why, but he wasn't there. Jesus, the resurrected Jesus, appears to them, and of course, they're freaking out about it. They go tell Thomas
because he's back from the dead,
right? So they see Thomas and they go, "We saw the Lord." And so Thomas says, "Well, unless I can put my fingers in the nail prints of his hands and touch his side where the spear went in, I will never believe." Now, it's important to note that that Thomas is only asking for the same thing that had happened with the disciples. So when Jesus appeared to the disciples when Thomas wasn't there, they got to touch his hands and his side. And so they're relaying this to Thomas, and he's going, I want that.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, like so when you read John 20, the two accounts happen back to back. Jesus appears to the 10, and then Jesus appears to the 11. So that would be with Thomas, right? So they've appeared to him. And so Thomas is saying, I want that. And so what you read is then Jesus appears to Thomas or to the 12 again a week later, to the disciples a week later, and says to Thomas, hey, Thomas, come here, touch my hands, touch my side. So anyway, that's where kind of the story or the whole moniker of doubting Thomas comes from. And kind of the church idea that often gets communicated is don't be that guy. Because here's why, because Jesus says, stop disbelieving, Thomas, and believe. And then he says, blessed, or you have seen me and have believed. But he goes, but blessed are the people that will never see me and believe. And he's speaking about all the people, the billions of people that would come after Thomas who've never seen Jesus in the flesh. But Thomas did, and he's going, they're going to be blessed because they're going to see me, or they're going to believe in me without ever having seen me.
Is having doubts just synonymous with having questions?
Yeah, I think you could probably say that. I think there are different categories of doubt, different ways to think about it. That I think you can't lump it all into one category, which is what I think sometimes we Christians tend to do.
Okay.
So we have one category for doubt and one label for that category, which is bad. Don't do it. Don't be that guy. So I think what that ends up doing is it ends up making us feel like Jesus doesn't want your questions, or at least the church doesn't want your questions. They don't want to hear you ask, why this? What about that? Help me understand this.
Yeah.
And what's elevated is this idea of blind faith. You just need to believe, man. Just believe. And it's so this is what we mean by that, or what I think is often communicated is this idea of don't look for evidence. Don't think about it. Just go with it, which sounds like a real scam, doesn't it? It's like, an email from a Nigerian prince. Just believe it. You got 20 million in an account or whatever.
So what are those categories?
Okay. Yeah, I think Proverbs, so the book of Proverbs, which is wisdom literature from the Old Testament, written by a guy named Solomon.
The whole thing written by Solomon?
Yeah, well, they're the sayings of Solomon, and then some of them are the sayings of other wise people that are included.
But mostly
in the book.
Solomon.
Mostly Solomon,
okay.
yeah. So there's kind of three categories of people laid out in that book. There's the simple, which is the person who doesn't know any better, and they end up doing stupid stuff just because they didn't know any different. Then there's the fool who did know what they shouldn't do, but they ignored it. So they had some sense of what should happen, but they ignored that sense. And then the scoffer is the person who's sort of actively resistant to what God is asking them to do. So you have the simple, the fool, and the scoffer. And I think actually that framework is helpful for understanding the ways that we process and experience doubt. So let me walk you through it. The simple is the person who's never really tested their faith. You wouldn't have to be a Christian for this. There's a lot of people who've just never really examined why they believe what they believe.
Yeah. Okay.
You could be Muslim, you could be secular, you could be Buddhist, you could be Christian. You've just inherited a set of beliefs, and you've never really tested those. Now, so let's talk about that within the kind of uniquely Christian worldview or framework. You know, a young person raised in church, Christian parents, the whole thing, go to Christian school or homeschool, something like that. Then
not public school.
Yeah, well, a lot of times not. Yeah, because they don't, and a lot of Christian parents are like, I don't want my kids exposed to all that, don't want them in that sort of environment. So then they end up going to college, and they get around a professor or some friends who starts asking really difficult questions that they can't anser. Starts poking holes in their worldview. Yeah, they're being tested, and they have no responses. I remember years ago, I was working on a project, and there was a contractor who I think probably happened to recognize that I was a church guy or, pastor's son or something like that. And he started asking me these really difficult Bible questions, not like Bible trivia questions, but like, what about the differences or the disagreements between the Gospels? What about, older creation, myths that predate, the biblical account of creation that are really strangely similar to the biblical narrative? What about that? And I'm standing there like 19, 20, 21 years old, whatever I was, just kind of dumbfounded. I had no idea how to respond to this guy as he was challenging me with these questions. It was, I still remember it was very uncomfortable. And then he just goes, I'm just messing with it. And he walks away. But I think he was probably, my guess is that he was probably either an atheist or an agnostic or someone who doesn't believe in Christianity and was kind of poking at me because he probably bumped into a lot of people who believed things but didn't know why they believed them. And I actually think that's a really dangerous place to be. I think a lot of young people, I think, lose their faith because this is the only faith they have. It's an inherited faith.
Ooh.
I kind of think of it like a house of cards. It's all there until, a professor or a friend or an experience in life.
Oh, yeah.
And boom, the whole thing falls apart.
Yeah, we were talking earlier about a friend of mine who believed with her church that her mom would be healed of cancer.
Yeah.
Her mom died.
Right.
And the church said to her, well, at least you'll get to see her in heaven. And she said, I believed you the first time and you were wrong. Why would I believe you now?
Right.
That's an all too common situation.
Right. So faith collapses. Moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So that's what I would maybe kind of categorize respectfully, someone who's just kind of simply believed what's been told them. And then some significant situation happens and everything just kind of collapses. The second category is the person who knows but ignores. That's the fool. And I think what happens here is that sometimes I think we know we have doubts, but they go unacknowledged, unexpressed. Maybe for personal reasons, they're too uncomfortable to utter. We don't like negative feelings. I don't want to talk about that.
Yeah.
It might cost me. What would happen with my relationship with my parents if I vocalize these things? My church. Sometimes what happens is we feel these things and we bring them to people and they reject us. this happens too. And so you end up in this situation where we have this kind of unresolved questions. And if they go ignored for too long, I think what ends up happening a lot of times is faith can collapse there as well and lead to a real crisis where we end up walking away from our faith. So I see a lot of people, especially young people, this can happen with, where in an effort to mask those feelings, those ugly feelings or those doubts that are unexpressed, they overcompensate in the other direction by becoming really loudly zealous and kind of like the super Christian, super committed, over the top, and often end up turning around and becoming judgmental of the people who aren't like them. But what ends up happening is all of that's really a facade. I think they're propping themselves up because they don't know what to do with these deep faith questions or identity questions. Could be sexual identity, could be other identity issues and challenges that people face, or some other crisis that we don't. So it's like someone who's denying grief. If you've ever run into someone who's maybe been through something tragic and their response is just to kind of put on a happy face and act like, yeah, I'm good. Nothing's happened. I think that's the same kind of thing here. Let's just avoid all that.
And I think sometimes it's not even intentional. I know that I've looked back and been like, oh, I had doubts back then, and I just didn't realize what I was experiencing. I didn't understand until now that I was being loud.
Yeah.
And I also think
trying to convince yourself almost.
Yeah, without even maybe really realizing it, because it's scary. Like, especially if you grew up like a church person, you're like, this is what my whole foundation is built on, and now there are cracks in it.
Yeah.
I also think it's interesting that you maybe don't specifically your whole life sit in one bucket of doubt, but like you might progress. You start off with the first untested and the second, and then it kind of can move you. You have that experience and it moves you to the second.
I think that's such an interesting insight. So yeah, you could start off kind of things are simple, untested, then something happens, but you don't want to quite give up your faith just yet. Yeah. So you kind of push that aside and you enter into the second category, which the Bible calls a fool. And the reason is it's not trying to be insulting. The reason that you're called a fool in this category is because you know there's something there. It's refusal to deal with it. And that's just foolish.
Oh, wow.
That just doesn't make any sense. So I mean, there's a self-preservation thing that's trying to go on, but it's not helping you.
Yeah.
And so when we willfully deny, repress, ignore, we're only delaying the inevitable. And then what ends up, so what's unfortunate is that all of that can finally erupt, and often does, in some moment of existential crisis. And that can take you to the final category, which is called the scoffer, which is where your whole world's been wrecked to such a degree that you're now turning around angry at who you were.
Oh, man.
Angry at the church, angry at people with faith, angry at God, all of it. And now you have this kind of hardened heart where you're just sort of closed off to the gospel.
You know what's in it? I haven't thought about this before. That is not unlike marriage, because you can kind of have your. I mean, typically not everybody's marriage is the same, but you have kind of this honeymoon period where it's kind of
and then it gets real,
and then it gets real.
Yeah,
and if there's a situation, if there's a tension between you and your wife or your husband,
so true.
How foolish would it be, and is, to just ignore it?
Right.
That is going to end up in an explosion.
Exactly. And then what ends up happening? Then there's divorce, and now I hate this person that I used to love.
Yeah.
Exactly. Same kind of pathway.
Yeah. I mean, it's relationship.
Right. Yeah. That's really interesting.
Okay, so I'll just ask this question.
Right.
Is it, I mean, we're talking about it, but if I'm a Jesus follower, is it okay for me to have questions and doubts?
The simple answer is yes.
Okay, so simple answer is yes.
Yeah, because I think it's human to have questions. There are several places where we read, not only with Thomas, but right after the resurrection, Matthew 28, there's a really interesting passage there that says Jesus is appearing, he's resurrected, and he's appearing to this whole crowd of people. And it says some worshiped, but then it says, and others doubted.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that like a fascinating little detail that Matthew records. Is like, here's people, and they're looking at Jesus resurrected, and they're just not sure what to make of it. And kind of rightfully so, because it's not every day you see someone rise from the dead.
Mm.
That's where Thomas is at.
Yeah.
I mean, Christianity is asking you to believe in fact, I think Christianity is asking you to believe the most fantastic thing.
Yeah.
But not without merit, and not without facts, and not without reason. And I think that's the part that I think is really important to understand, is that if you've been sold a version of Christianity that says, don't think, just believe, that's not the Christianity of the scriptures. That's not who Jesus was. When people asked him questions, he responded. He didn't ignore or say or scold people for even asking.
Yeah.
He invited that. So we have this faith that we can, I think deeply about and ask our questions and take them to Jesus. And so that's exactly what's happening with Thomas. So to understand Thomas's story, you have to understand, I think, first of all, who Thomas was.
Mm-hmm.
He was a disciple. He had been following Jesus for 3 years. He had heard all of his teachings. He had watched him perform miracle after miracle. In fact, the end of John 20, right after the story of Thomas, says that if everything that Jesus had done had been written down, the world couldn't contain the books. John is basically saying, look, this is only a fraction of what I saw Jesus do. So Thomas saw all of that too. He was there. And so he has come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, this long-awaited ruler of Israel who's going to make everything right. He's this kind of mythic figure from the Old Testament that no one knows exactly who he's going to be or how he's going to show up. And they were all eagerly awaiting him to show up. And so here's Jesus, this rabbi, doing the most amazing things, miracles not even written about in the Old Testament, things that no one did. Jesus is doing this. Surely, like, if anybody's going to be the Messiah, it's this guy. So Thomas has placed his faith in Jesus, and then he's crucified. And his whole world is wrecked. He's having a crisis of faith. He's trying to make sense of what he's experienced. On the one hand, he's got Jesus, this rabbi that he deeply believed in. And on the other hand, he's seeing this guy that he deeply believed in be crucified. And that's significant because they viewed crucifixion or death like this as God's judgment. So here's this guy that has, from Thomas's perspective, been amazing, wonderful, perfect, incredible. And then now God's judging him for what? It's weird. Why does he die? That's how they would have viewed this death, this crucifixion. So when the disciples show up and say he's risen from the dead, he's trying to make sense of, who is Jesus? Is he the Messiah? What does this all mean? He had no category. Even the good Jew that he was, he had no category for a crucified, resurrected Messiah. It never entered his mind. So he's having to come to grips with this whole new reality. And so you can forgive him for trying to make sense of this, which is why Jesus appears to him and says, okay, Thomas, touch my hands and feel my side. Because Thomas isn't skeptically, kind of smugly at a distance going, prove it to me, Jesus, prove it to me. Like, that's not what's happening. He's deeply, personally trying to wrestle this out in the community of faith. And that's where he meets Jesus.
I think too, no pun intended, we got to give Thomas the benefit of the doubt. We got this story with a conclusion.
Yeah.
So you go back and live in those 3 days.
No kidding.
Before, and like, how would you feel?
Well, so for Thomas, it was even more than that. So Jesus is crucified on Friday.
Right. Yeah.
He's resurrected on Sunday. We don't know when he appears to the disciples, but let's call it Sunday night. So Sunday night, he appears to the 10 disciples, Judas not there, Thomas not there. And then it's a week later. So for Thomas, it's 10 days later.
Yeah.
He saw Jesus crucified 10 days earlier. He's been living in anguish this whole time, trying to make sense of his life. What did he just give the last 3 years of his life to? What does any of that mean?
Yeah.
Were those miracles real? What's happening? His whole world has come unraveled. So when Jesus appears to him, he says, touch my fingers and put your hands on my side. It's amazing because Thomas's response is, my Lord and my God.
Yeah.
Like it all came together for him in a moment. It's like, oh, wow, this is who you are. I don't know. That's pretty amazing to me.
I was just thinking about those 10 days. And I mean, maybe he asked more questions, but 10 days alone with his thoughts.
It's a long time.
It's actually pretty, what's the word I'm looking for? It's pretty commendable
Right.
that he would maybe be convinced so quickly after being alone with his thoughts for so long. That's because that's a lot of questioning, a lot of doubting, and
absolutely
waking up and being like, oh yeah, Christ is still dead.
Yeah.
Or I haven't seen him
so
yet.
you're not only, you're processing grief, you're processing your own feelings, the questions of what any of this meant. I mean, there's so much he's trying to deal with all at once. So the picture, and I think the example or model that we have is of someone not smugly standing away from the faith going, prove it to me, but someone who's deeply curious.
Yeah.
And I guess I would just say this to anyone that might be listening that is skeptical, to just go, don't you owe it to yourself? I mean, consider how many billions of people throughout history for the last 2,000 years have converted to Christianity and have believed that Jesus was in fact God. And I'm talking about not just a bunch of poor, uneducated idiots, but some of the most amazing thinkers of our in human history fall into this category, who've wrestled deeply with these questions and come to the conclusion that in fact Jesus was God.
Yeah.
Don't you owe it to yourself to, like Thomas, pursue that and say, who is this person? What is his identity? See, that's interesting. And I'm just actually thinking about this right now while we're talking about it. That's what Thomas is looking for. What is your identity? Who are you, Jesus? Like, who are you really? That's the whole question. That's what it all hinges on. If Jesus is God, like that changes everything. If he is. And if he's not, that also changes everything. We shouldn't espouse any of the things that he taught. We shouldn't hold him in any kind of esteem. So, that's the question. Like, who are you really? And when he meets him, he says, my Lord and my God. He comes to that conclusion. But I just think you owe it to yourself to really, truly wrestle with the questions.
We have a picture here of a learner having questions and bringing them to Jesus.
Right.
Is that a good model for us?
I absolutely. Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah.
I think that's it. It's like, I think you owe it to yourself to go all the way to the bottom and really kind of mine out and go, okay, let's figure this out and really ask honestly. You get one life.
Yeah.
Why not figure it out? Why not investigate and come to the conclusion, either he is who he said he was or he's not. And if he's not, then you can walk away from it and you can give it up and never have to think about it again. But if he is, that also changes everything. And so the picture of doubt that we get from Thomas is this guy who's pressing into that question.
Yeah.
Not
trying to prove you wrong.
Right, exactly. Not standing at a distance, lobbing grenades in, gotcha grenades going, prove it to me, make me believe it. That's not what's happening. This is a guy who's deeply wrestling with this. And I think that's exactly what we should be doing, is deeply wrestling with. And I would say, be prepared for that to take time. It was 10 days for Thomas. 10 days with his thoughts. The agony of that, like psychological agony. And Jesus lets him go through it, but he eventually shows up. And I think the same thing's true. It may not happen immediately, but I think if you keep pressing, my confidence in Jesus is this: you keep pressing in, he will reveal himself to you.
Thomas was able to literally physically go to Jesus.
Yeah.
Jesus doesn't physically live on the earth today.
Right.
How do we do that?
Yeah, well, I think that's where the community of Jesus comes in. Jesus said, where 2 or 3 are gathered, or 2 or more are gathered in my name, I'm there among them. In other words, the community of the church is where you find the presence of Jesus. Does that mean that everybody in the church is like Jesus? No, unfortunately, it doesn't. But it's in a good, I think, Christ-honoring, Christ-pursuing community that you can have that encounter and interaction. And so I, for one, would recommend someone to do this. So maybe what that looks like if you're a non-Christian, I would say, or a skeptic, or maybe you think you might be or don't know exactly where you stand, I would say get in a Bible study with a Christian. Like, find someone that chances are you know someone who's probably devout in their faith, and go, hey, can we study the Bible together? I'm asking these questions and I want to know. And so I think that would be a great place to start, is to get in a little small group of people and start reading scripture and see what happens. I know lots of people who were totally converted that way, who just had never really had the discussions. They'd never really asked the questions. When they did, it kind of came together for them.
But the goal, like, if I'm a skeptic, my goal isn't to be converted. My goal is to find truth.
Yeah, sure. Right. Yeah. But I would just say, yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to, I guess I just know how this works, because I know who Jesus, because I believe that Jesus is real. I think I know exactly what's going to happen.
Yeah. You were talking about getting in a community of people who are following Jesus, and you touched on it, but I think it's important to continually say people are broken.
Yeah.
Even the ones who are the pastors and Jesus followers. And it feels like, you can tell me if I'm wrong or if there's more to this, it feels like, though, if you get in a community with people who, although broken, are pursuing Jesus, that's a good spot to be.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's the best spot you can be, personally. And I think if you're asking questions of faith, I think that's where you ought to be, especially if it's Christianity and you're pursuing that. Get in a community, ask your questions, and see if Jesus doesn't reveal himself to you like he did to Thomas.
Hey, thanks for listening to this episode of our podcast. Spirit in Motion is a podcast from Church on the Move in Tulsa, Oklahoma. For more information, you can go to churchonthemove.com. We'll see you next time.